Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Easy English Spark channel. I'm so glad you're here today. If you've been looking to enhance your English listening and speaking skills, then you're in the right place. In today's video, we'll be diving into some powerful tips to help you build confidence, overcome shyness, and take your fluency to the next level. We'll also explore how patience, persistence, and celebrating your progress can light the way on your English learning journey. Let's get started and spark up your English. Chapter 1: The Beginning of a Journey. When I first started learning English, I wasn't always confident. I was just like many of you, eager to speak fluently but unsure of how to go about it. I remember being in school, looking at my classmates, and feeling that they were so much better at English than I was. They spoke without hesitation. They used big words, and they seemed to understand everything. Meanwhile, I would struggle to form sentences, and when I spoke, I felt like I was making mistakes all the time. I remember thinking, how am I ever going to become fluent in English? But there was one moment that changed everything for me. One day, while I was sitting in class, feeling frustrated, my teacher noticed how hard I was trying. He came up to me and said something that stuck with me for the rest of my life. He looked at me and said, "You can be fluent in English if you practice every day." It wasn't a magic formula, and it wasn't a secret that I hadn't heard before. But something about the way he said it, calmly, with certainty, made me realize that I had been approaching English the wrong way. I had been trying to rush to fluency, thinking that if I just memorized enough vocabulary or learned enough grammar rules, I would somehow become fluent overnight. But my teacher helped me understand that fluency isn't something that happens in a moment. It's not something you can wish for or force. Fluency, I realized, is like growing a tree. You don't plant the seed one day and expect it to grow into a large, strong tree the next day. It takes time, patience, and care. You need to water it, nurture it, and protect it from the elements. Over time, you'll see the tree grow, stretch out its branches, and eventually become something strong and tall. It's the same with learning English. Every day, you have to put in the effort, even if it seems like you're not seeing immediate results. Little by little, you'll improve. And one day, you'll look back and realize just how far you've come. I realized that fluency wasn't about being perfect from the start. It wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about getting better every single day. I needed to change my mindset. Instead of focusing on the big picture, I began focusing on small daily steps. I would wake up every morning thinking, what can I do today to improve my English? I started by listening to English every chance I got. I watched TV shows in English, I listened to music, and I started reading books, even if I didn't understand every word. At first, it was tough. I didn't know many words, and my sentences were often jumbled. But as I practiced, I felt myself becoming more comfortable. The more I listened, the more I began to understand. The more I spoke, the less afraid I was of making mistakes. It wasn't an easy journey. There were times when I felt like giving up. There were days when I thought, this is never going to work. I'll never be fluent. But I remembered what my teacher said. Practice every day. So I kept going. And gradually, I began to see progress. The most important thing that I learned in those early days was that fluency is not something that happens quickly. It's not a destination you reach in a week or a month. It's a journey. And every day, no matter how small the step, you move closer to your goal. I know it might seem daunting right now. You might feel like you're not making any progress. But I promise you, if you practice every day, no matter how small the steps, you will improve. And one day, you will look back at how far you've come and realize that all that time and effort paid off. So, if you're starting your journey to fluency today, remember, it's okay to take it slow. It's okay to make mistakes. In fact, mistakes are a crucial part of the process. They're not something to fear, but something to learn from. The important thing is that you keep going, because fluency is not about perfection, it's about consistency. And just like planting that tree, the more care you put into your learning, the stronger and more confident your English will become. So, let's take it one day at a time and enjoy the journey. I promise you, if you stick with it, one day you will look back and be amazed at how far you've come. Chapter 2: Overcoming the Fear of Mistakes. As I continued my journey of learning English, something became very clear to me. I had a huge fear of making mistakes. I wasn't alone in this. Many of my classmates and students I've met since then have shared the same fear. They were terrified of saying something wrong, of being judged, of sounding silly. But let me tell you something that I wish someone had told me back then. Mistakes are a natural part of learning. In fact, they're one of the most valuable parts of the learning process. I vividly remember the first time I spoke in English outside the classroom. I was in a conversation with a classmate, trying to practice what I had learned. I knew the grammar, I had the vocabulary, but when I started speaking, everything seemed to slip away. I hesitated, fumbled over my words, and felt like I wasn't making any sense. I thought, oh no, they're going to laugh at me. I sound ridiculous. I felt embarrassed, and all I wanted to do was run away and hide. But then, something happened. My classmate smiled and said, "Don't worry, everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is that you're trying." That moment stuck with me. I realized that the fear of making mistakes was holding me back. It wasn't the mistakes that were the problem, it was my fear of them. Mistakes are not a sign of failure. They're not something to hide or avoid. Instead, they're opportunities to learn and grow. Every time we make a mistake, we have the chance to understand what went wrong and correct it. I think back to that first conversation where I made all those mistakes. At the time, it felt like a disaster, but looking back now, I can see that it was one of the most important lessons I learned on my journey to fluency. I also realized that fear of mistakes often holds us back from speaking and using the language. We become so focused on getting everything right that we forget the most important part of learning: communication. Language is meant to be used, not just studied. Fluency comes from speaking, even when we're not sure we're perfect. It comes from the courage to try, even when we might mess up. Over time, I started to change my approach. Instead of worrying about making mistakes, I began to embrace them. I told myself, it's okay to make mistakes. Every mistake I make brings me one step closer to being fluent. I started to see mistakes as tools for growth rather than obstacles. One of my students, Sarah, faced the same fear when she started. She would come to class with a notebook full of notes, ready to speak, but when it was her turn, she would freeze. I could see the fear in her eyes, and I knew exactly what she was going through. It was the fear of sounding foolish, the fear of getting something wrong. I sat down with her and said, "Sarah, let me tell you something I wish I had learned sooner. Mistakes are part of the process. Don't be afraid of them. Embrace them." At first, she didn't believe me. She said, "But what if people laugh at me? What if I sound silly?" I smiled and replied, "People who truly want to help you will never laugh at your mistakes. And anyone who does laugh is not someone whose opinion you should worry about. The important thing is that you're learning, and learning comes with mistakes. The more mistakes you make, the more you're learning." I encouraged her to speak, even if she wasn't sure about a word or a sentence. "Speak to me," I said. "It's okay if you make a mistake. I'm here to help you." The more you practice, the less afraid you'll be. Slowly, Sarah started to speak more freely, making mistakes, laughing at herself, and gradually improving. With each mistake, she learned something new. Eventually, her confidence grew, and her fluency followed. This story with Sarah reminds me of something that's so important to remember. Fluency isn't about perfection. It's about progress. It's about making mistakes and learning from them. It's about being brave enough to speak, even when you don't feel ready. That's how you get better. As I continued my own journey and helped more students, I noticed that many people hold themselves back because they're afraid of being judged. They're afraid of what others might think. But let me tell you this, the people who matter, your teachers, your friends, your fellow learners, they won't judge you for making mistakes. They're there to support you, to help you learn, and to celebrate your progress. So, here's what I want you to take away from this chapter. Don't let the fear of making mistakes stop you. Mistakes are a part of the process. They are not your enemy. They are your best teachers. Every time you speak and make a mistake, you are learning. Every time you try, you are moving closer to fluency. I know that it's not easy to let go of the fear. It takes time and practice. But every time you speak, every time you make a mistake and learn from it, you're getting stronger. So go ahead, make mistakes, embrace them, let them be a part of your journey, and remember, fluency is not about being perfect. It's about being persistent, learning from your mistakes, and never giving up. And one last thing, don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. I promise you, learning English will be much more fun if you can laugh along the way. Chapter 3: The Power of Repetition. As I continued my journey to fluency, I began to realize that there was a secret to learning English that I hadn't fully understood before. Repetition. It's simple, yet incredibly powerful. Repetition is one of the most effective ways to improve your skills, and I can't tell you enough how important it is to practice things over and over again. At first, I didn't appreciate it as much. I thought, isn't it enough to just learn something once and move on? But I quickly learned that fluency isn't built on a single attempt or a single lesson. It's built on repetition. Let me share a story from my own experience that helped me understand the importance of repetition. When I was a student, there was one word that I could never remember. It was simple, not too difficult, but for some reason, it kept slipping from my mind. I would hear it, I would read it, and I would even try writing it down. But every time I needed to use it, it would disappear. I thought, why can't I remember this one word? It was frustrating, and I felt like I was never going to get it right. One day, after struggling with this for a few weeks, I realized that I wasn't really practicing enough. I had been reading and listening to the word, but I wasn't using it enough in my own speech. So I decided to do something different. I made a note of the word and said it aloud to myself multiple times a day. I repeated it while brushing my teeth. I repeated it when I was walking to class, and I repeated it when I was talking to my friends. At first, it felt a little silly, but after a while, I started to notice something amazing. The word became a part of my vocabulary. It was no longer something I had to think about. It came to me naturally. And this wasn't just about one word. It was about everything I was learning. Repetition helped me internalize the language. Whether it was a new phrase, a grammar rule, or a listening exercise, repeating it over and over allowed me to really make it stick in my mind. The more I repeated, the more it became second nature to me. It was like building a habit, something I didn't even have to think about because it became automatic. One of the most powerful techniques I used was listening to English every day. I would listen to English songs, podcasts, and even short stories. I didn't always understand everything, but the key was repetition. The more I listened to the same things, the more familiar the words and phrases became. At first, I only understood bits and pieces, but with each repetition, I understood more and more. The patterns started to make sense. The intonation, the rhythm of the language, the way sentences were structured, all of it started to become clearer. Repetition is also important when it comes to speaking. I remember the first time I tried to speak in English with someone. I was nervous, and I struggled to find the right words. But I kept going, and after every conversation, I would replay it in my mind. I would think about what went well and where I made mistakes, and then I would practice those same sentences again, over and over, until they felt comfortable and natural. The more I repeated, the more confident I became. The words flowed more easily, and I didn't have to think so hard about them anymore. One of my students, Lily, was struggling with speaking English fluently. She would freeze up every time she tried to have a conversation. She had the words and the knowledge, but when it came time to speak, it just wasn't coming out the way she wanted. I could see her frustration. I knew she wasn't going to become fluent by simply studying vocabulary or reading a book. She needed to practice, but more than that, she needed to repeat. I sat down with her and said, "Lily, fluency comes through repetition. It's about doing it again and again until it becomes part of who you are." I encouraged her to take a few simple sentences and repeat them every day, to say them in different situations with different people, and not just once, but many times. At first, she wasn't sure if it was going to work. She thought, what's the point of repeating the same thing over and over? But I assured her that repetition was the key. Slowly, Lily started to speak more freely. The sentences became easier, the words were at her fingertips, and she was no longer struggling to recall what she had learned. The more she repeated, the better she became, and eventually, she was speaking confidently. This is something I've seen time and time again with my students. Repetition works. It works for vocabulary, it works for grammar, it works for listening, and it works for speaking. But it's not just about repeating something once or twice. It's about building repetition into your daily life. It's about making it a part of your routine so that it becomes natural. There's a simple rule that I now live by. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes progress. The more you repeat, the better you get. Fluency is not a result of trying something once and moving on. Fluency is the result of consistent practice, day after day, month after month. It's the result of repeating something enough times that it becomes second nature to you. And here's the truth. It's okay to repeat things that you've already learned. Don't think of repetition as boring or redundant. Think of it as a way to deepen your understanding. Fluency is not about learning new things every day. It's about mastering the things you already know. So don't be afraid to go over the same vocabulary, the same grammar, or the same sentences again and again. Every time you do, you're building a stronger foundation. The power of repetition doesn't just apply to language learning. It applies to everything. Whether it's learning to play an instrument, learning to cook, or learning a sport, repetition is the secret. It's how we improve. The more we do something, the more we understand it, the more we internalize it, and the more we can perform it without thinking. So I encourage you, if you're serious about becoming fluent in English, embrace repetition. Say those words over and over. Listen to the same song 10 times. Read that book again. Practice speaking in English every chance you get. Every time you repeat something, you're getting closer to your goal. Fluency is within your reach, and repetition is the bridge that will get you there. Chapter 4. The Role of Confidence. As I continued my journey toward fluency, one thing became abundantly clear. Confidence is one of the most powerful tools you can have in your language learning journey. I don't just mean confidence in knowing the right words or using perfect grammar. I'm talking about the confidence to speak, Even when you're not sure you're perfect, the confidence to keep going, even when you make mistakes, the confidence to believe that you can improve, even when progress seems slow. Confidence is the key that unlocks fluency. I remember a time when I first started speaking English with other people. I knew the words, I knew the rules, but when I tried to speak, I would freeze. I was scared of sounding wrong. What if I made a mistake? What if they didn't understand me? All these questions ran through my mind, and every time I spoke, I hesitated. The fear of making a mistake, the fear of being judged by others, held me back. But then, I had a turning point. One day, a fellow student in my class, Mark, shared his story with me. Mark had always been outgoing, but when it came to speaking English, he would hold back. He said, "I know all the words, I know the grammar, but every time I try to speak, I get so nervous." I understood exactly how he felt. It was the fear of saying something wrong, of making a fool of himself. But I also saw that Mark was already a great student. He had the knowledge. What he needed was the confidence to speak. I decided to share with Mark what I had learned along my own journey. I told him, confidence isn't something that just magically happens. It comes from action. You have to speak even when you're unsure. You have to trust yourself and believe that the more you speak, the more confident you will become. At first, Mark was skeptical. He wasn't sure he could just speak his way into confidence. But I encouraged him to take small steps, to start with simple conversations, to practice speaking with me, and slowly, he began to open up. The first time Mark spoke confidently in class was a turning point for him. He didn't have the perfect pronunciation, and he didn't always use the best vocabulary, but he spoke with a clear sense of determination. After his first confident attempt, something amazing happened. His classmates understood him, and they praised him for trying. That small moment of success gave him the courage to speak more, to take risks with the language, and to push through his doubts. Over time, Mark became one of the most confident speakers in our class. His fluency improved, not because he knew everything perfectly, but because he wasn't afraid to speak, even when he wasn't sure. And Mark's story taught me something vital. Confidence is not about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to try. You see, when it comes to learning a language, the biggest barrier isn't your knowledge or your ability to learn. It's your mindset. If you're constantly worried about being judged or making mistakes, that fear will hold you back. But if you believe in yourself, If you have the confidence to speak and keep going, you'll progress faster than you ever imagined. Confidence also plays a huge role in how you use the language. I've noticed that students who speak with confidence, even if they don't use perfect grammar or vocabulary, are much more effective communicators. Why? Because confidence allows you to express your ideas clearly. When you're confident, people are more likely to listen to you. They're more likely to understand you, and they're more likely to engage with you. But when you hesitate, when you doubt yourself, your message gets lost. I also saw this with one of my students, Claire. Claire was very knowledgeable. She had studied English for years, and she understood everything we discussed in class. But every time it was her turn to speak, she would get nervous and start second-guessing herself. She would fumble with her words, even though I knew she knew the answer. So I pulled her aside and asked, "Why do you hold back?" She said, "I don't want to sound stupid. What if I say the wrong thing?" I smiled and said, "Claire, no one is expecting perfection. Fluency comes from using what you know. The more you speak, the more confident you'll become." I suggested that Claire practice speaking with me before class in a no-pressure environment. Slowly, she began to speak more freely. The more she spoke, the more confident she became. Eventually, she began to speak up more in class, and her language skills improved tremendously. Claire learned that it wasn't about speaking perfectly, it was about speaking regularly, with confidence, even when she made mistakes. Confidence is also essential in overcoming the fear of making mistakes, which we talked about earlier. When you trust in yourself, mistakes don't feel like failures. They feel like opportunities. Instead of saying, "Oh no, I made a mistake," you'll say, "Okay, I made a mistake. Now I know what to fix." And that mindset shift makes all the difference in your learning journey. When you approach learning with confidence, you begin to see mistakes not as obstacles, but as steps toward fluency. I know it's not easy to be confident when you're learning something new, but the key is to start small. Confidence grows with each successful attempt. You don't have to be perfect right away. You just have to be brave enough to speak, even when you're unsure. Over time, as you continue to take risks, your confidence will build and fluency will come naturally. I remember how much I struggled in the beginning. I wasn't always confident in my abilities, but I started practicing every day. I spoke whenever I could, even if I was afraid of making mistakes. I took small steps, and little by little, I built my confidence. The more I spoke, the more I realized that I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be myself and trust in the process. So, if you're struggling with confidence, let me offer you this advice. Start by speaking. Even if you're not perfect, even if you're unsure, just speak. Don't worry about being flawless. Just focus on communicating. With each conversation, with each attempt, your confidence will grow. And before you know it, you'll be speaking with the same confidence that you've always admired in others. Remember, fluency is about progress, not perfection. And the more confident you are in your ability to speak, the more fluent you will become. So, take a deep breath, believe in yourself, and start speaking. Confidence will follow, and with it, your path to fluency. Chapter 5. Thinking in English. As I continued my journey toward fluency, one of the most transformative shifts I experienced was learning to think in English. At first, I didn't even realize how much I was relying on my native language to understand and speak English. I would think in my own language, translate it into English in my head, and then try to speak. It wasn't efficient, and it wasn't natural. My sentences were slower, and I often got lost in translation. The words I needed didn't always come to me quickly, and the whole process felt laborious. But one day, during a class, my teacher asked us a simple question. "Can you think in English?" The room went quiet. Most of us hadn't really thought about it before. We knew the words, we knew the grammar rules, but could we think directly in English without translating everything in our heads? That question stayed with me. I began to realize that thinking in English was a crucial step toward fluency. It wasn't just about memorizing vocabulary or understanding grammar. It was about shifting my mindset so that English became the primary way my mind processed information. Let me explain. When you think in your native language and then translate into English, you are creating an extra step. Instead of immediately forming a sentence in English, you are first thinking in one language, then doing a mental translation, and only then speaking in English. This slows you down and makes you feel less confident. The goal is to skip that middle step and go directly to English. When you can think in English, your speech becomes more fluid, and your confidence grows. I remember when I first tried to practice thinking in English. It wasn't easy. I would try to describe things around me in English, but I found myself getting stuck. For example, when I saw a car on the street, I would think, "That's a car. I need to say car in English." But then I would find myself pausing, trying to think of the right word. Or when I wanted to describe a situation, I would translate from my native language and realize halfway through that it didn't sound quite right in English. This back and forth process felt exhausting, but I didn't give up. I kept practicing. One technique that helped me was to immerse myself in English as much as possible. I started listening to English podcasts, watching English movies, and reading books in English. I didn't always understand everything, but I was exposed to the language so much that over time, it started to feel natural. The more I surrounded myself with English, the more my brain began to make connections directly in English, without needing to translate from my native language. Soon, I noticed a change. I could think of words more quickly. I could form sentences faster. It wasn't about memorizing more words or grammar rules. It was about immersing myself in the language until it became second nature. I started to think in English when I was alone, when I was walking, when I was cooking, and even when I was lying in bed before sleep. It wasn't always perfect, but the more I did it, the more natural it became. This shift didn't happen overnight. It took time, but every small effort paid off. I noticed that the more I practiced thinking in English, the more I began to speak naturally. Conversations flowed more easily. I didn't need to pause and think about how to say things. They just came out. This was a game changer for me. One of my students, Emma, was struggling with this very issue. She was constantly translating everything in her head before speaking, which made her conversation slower and less fluent. I could see her frustration when she would get stuck looking for the right word or phrase. So, I suggested that she try an experiment. Think in English for 1 hour a day. At first, she was skeptical. She said, "I don't know if I can do it. I always think in my own language first." I told her, "That's okay. Start slow, and don't worry about being perfect. Just try to describe things in English, even if you don't have the exact word. Use your English vocabulary and think in English. You'll see improvement." Emma began practicing by narrating her day in English. When she was in the kitchen cooking, she would describe the ingredients, the actions, and the steps in English. She didn't care if the sentences weren't perfect. She just wanted to use English in her thoughts. And after a week of practicing, I could see the difference. She wasn't translating anymore. She was thinking in English, and it was making a huge difference in her fluency. Her sentences came out faster, and she was more confident in speaking. Thinking in English doesn't mean you need to stop thinking in your native language altogether. It doesn't mean you can't use both languages, but the more you practice thinking in English, the easier it will become to switch between the two without feeling like there's a barrier. And the more you practice, the more natural it will feel. Another important part of thinking in English is thinking in full sentences, not just isolated words. When we start learning a language, it's easy to get stuck thinking in individual words. For example, if I'm thinking about a trip, I might think of words like plane, airport, or luggage. But when you start thinking in sentences, I'm going to the airport tomorrow to catch my flight, you start to form a more complete picture. It's the difference between thinking in isolated vocabulary and thinking in context. The more you practice forming full sentences in your mind, the better your English will become. One trick I used to practice thinking in sentences was to talk to myself in English. I would describe what I was doing at the moment or what I had planned for the day. At first, I felt a bit awkward, but the more I did it, the more natural it became. I wasn't translating from my native language. I was speaking directly in English, and that practice helped me immensely. Let me give you a final piece of advice. Be patient with yourself. Thinking in English is a skill, and like any skill, it takes time to develop. Don't be discouraged if it's difficult at first. Don't worry if your thoughts feel clumsy or if you can't find the right words. Just keep practicing. Every day, try to think a little more in English, and soon you'll find that your mind begins to operate in English as naturally as it does in your native language. The more you practice thinking in English, the more fluent you will become. Fluency isn't just about speaking the right words at the right time. It's about making English your second nature. So go ahead. Start thinking in English today. It will change the way you speak, the way you understand, and the way you live the language. Chapter 6: Using Real-Life Situations. As I continued to grow in my language journey, one of the most powerful lessons I learned was that fluency isn't just about studying books, memorizing vocabulary, or practicing grammar rules. It's about using English in real-life situations. The moment I made this shift in my approach to learning, everything changed. I realized that in order to truly master a language, I needed to start applying it to my everyday life. It's not enough to study the language in a classroom or in isolation. You need to use it in real conversations, in real scenarios, and in real contexts. Let me explain why real-life practice is so essential. When you learn a language through traditional methods, like memorizing flashcards or practicing grammar exercises, it's important, but it's still limited. You can know all the words, understand all the grammar rules, but until you start using the language in the real world, you won't truly understand how it functions naturally. Language is meant to be used, not just studied. When you begin to speak in real situations, You are not only practicing the language, but also learning to navigate the culture and nuances of communication. I'll never forget one of my earliest experiences with using English in real-life situations. I had spent months studying, and I felt like I knew a lot of the vocabulary and grammar. I was confident when it came to writing or doing exercises, but when I finally found myself in a situation where I had to speak in English with someone, I froze. It wasn't that I didn't know what to say, I just wasn't used to speaking spontaneously. I wasn't prepared for the speed of a real conversation, for the small talk, for the slang, and for the interruptions that often happen in everyday interactions. I remember the first time I tried to order food at a restaurant in English. It seemed simple enough, but as I walked up to the counter, I suddenly realized that I was nervous. I was afraid of mispronouncing a word or getting something wrong. I kept repeating the words in my head, preparing for the conversation. And when the moment came, I almost couldn't speak. The words were there, but the situation was so real, so immediate, that I had to force myself to speak. What helped me push through was reminding myself that mistakes were okay. Mistakes didn't mean failure. They meant progress. And I needed to use the situation, however imperfectly, to learn. I ordered my meal, stumbled over a few words, but the cashier smiled, understood me, and handed me my food. It was a small victory, but in that moment, I realized something important. Using English in real-life situations is how you grow. After that experience, I started looking for opportunities to use English in my daily life. I didn't wait for the perfect moment or the ideal situation. I found ways to insert English into everything I did, even in small ways. I began having brief conversations with friends who spoke English, watching TV shows without subtitles, and even thinking in English when I was by myself. I started talking to strangers in English when I went shopping or out for a walk. And even though at first these conversations were awkward and stilted, every time I used English in real situations, I grew more confident. This is something I tell all my students. Don't wait for the perfect moment to speak English. The more you use it in real situations, the faster you'll improve. I once had a student named Anna who was extremely shy about speaking. She knew English well and had good grammar, but she was terrified of using it in real-life situations. She told me, "I'm scared people will judge me. What if I make a mistake?" I could understand her fear. It's something I had faced too. But I explained to her that the only way to get better at speaking is to speak, even if it's not perfect. So, I encouraged Anna to start small. I told her, Next time you go to a cafe, try ordering your coffee in English. If you're at the store, ask the cashier about something in English. She was hesitant at first, but the next week, she came to me with a big smile on her face. "I did it," she said. "I asked for my coffee in English, and it was easier than I thought. I made a mistake, but the barista helped me and smiled." Anna was surprised at how encouraging people could be when she tried. That small step gave her the confidence to continue. As I watched Anna's progress, it became clear to me that real-life situations aren't just opportunities for practicing vocabulary. They are lessons in real-world communication. For example, when you go to a grocery store and ask the price of an item in English, you're not only practicing your vocabulary but also learning how to interact with people in a casual, everyday setting. You're learning the rhythm of real conversations, how to ask questions, how to respond naturally, and how to manage unexpected situations, like when someone speaks too fast or uses slang. Real-life situations also teach you how to listen and adapt. When I first began using English in real situations, I found that understanding spoken English was one of the biggest challenges. I was used to hearing clear, slow speech in the classroom, but when I interacted with people in real life, they spoke quickly with different accents and sometimes with unfamiliar expressions. It was overwhelming at first, but the more I exposed myself to these situations, the better I got at understanding and responding. I learned to pick up on context clues, to ask for clarification when needed, and to keep the conversation going, even if I didn't know every word. Another real-life situation that helped me was traveling. I remember the first time I went to an English-speaking country. I had studied English for years, but nothing could have prepared me for the fast pace of real conversations in a foreign environment. I had to use English to ask for directions, order food, and make small talk with strangers. There were moments when I was unsure of what to say, but I kept reminding myself that mistakes were okay, and the more I spoke, the more I would improve. Using English in real-life situations is not just about practicing the language. It's about gaining confidence in your ability to use it in any context. Every time you use English in a real setting, you're not only practicing, but also reinforcing what you've learned. You're making it a natural part of your life, rather than something you only use in the classroom or when you're doing an exercise. And here's the thing. Real-life situations are not perfect. You will make mistakes. You may feel awkward. You might not always know the right word, but that's okay. The goal is to use English in situations where you can't control every variable. It's about practicing spontaneity, flexibility, and communication in a real context. And the more you do it, the better you will get. So, go ahead. Start using English in your daily life. Speak with strangers. Use English when you're out shopping or ordering food. Watch movies or TV shows in English without subtitles. Listen to podcasts or engage in conversations in English. Every opportunity to use the language in a real-life situation is a chance to improve, and every small step will bring you closer to fluency. Remember, fluency isn't just about knowing the language, it's about using it. Real-life situations are where the magic happens. It's where your language comes to life, and where you truly become fluent. Chapter 7. The Secret to Fluency. Listening. As I continued to study and practice English, I began to realize that listening was one of the most powerful tools in becoming fluent. It wasn't just about learning vocabulary, practicing grammar, or even speaking regularly. Listening, really listening, was the key that unlocked everything. I can honestly say that without listening, my fluency would have been limited. But with listening, I was able to improve not just my understanding, but my speaking, pronunciation, and confidence as well. When I first started learning English, I didn't fully understand the importance of listening. Like many people, I thought, speaking was the most important skill to focus on. I spent hours memorizing vocabulary, practicing sentences, and working on grammar exercises. I thought that once I learned all the rules and words, I would be able to speak fluently. But the truth is, speaking is only one part of the equation. The other half is listening. Without being able to listen, it becomes incredibly difficult to understand others, respond naturally, and improve your overall language skills. I'll never forget the first time I fully grasped the importance of listening in, learning a language. I was at a cafe with a friend, and we were chatting in English. We had been speaking for a while, and I thought I was doing well. But then my friend started telling a story, and I noticed that I couldn't catch every word. There were phrases and expressions I didn't understand, and I felt myself falling behind in the conversation. At that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't just learning the words or the grammar. I was learning the rhythm, the intonation, and the flow of the language. Listening wasn't just about hearing words. It was about understanding the whole message. It was about grasping the way the language sounds, how the words fit together in natural speech, and how meaning is communicated through tone and context. This realization changed everything for me. I started listening more consciously. I didn't just listen to learn vocabulary or grammar, but to understand how English is actually spoken in real life. I began listening to native speakers, to conversations in movies and TV shows, to podcasts, to radio programs, anything and everything I could get my hands on. One of the most important things I learned from listening is that fluency is not about speaking quickly, it's about speaking clearly and naturally. When you listen to how native speakers converse, you notice how they connect words, use contractions, and emphasize certain parts of their speech. It's not about pronouncing every single syllable perfectly. It's about understanding the flow of the language and being able to replicate it. Listening also helps with something else that I didn't initially appreciate: pronunciation. When I first started speaking English, I was so focused on saying the words correctly that I didn't pay attention to how those words fit into natural speech. But as I listened more, I began to notice how native speakers blended words together. For example, instead of saying, "I am going to the store," a native speaker might say, "I'm gonna go to the store." This change in pronunciation, while subtle, is something you can only learn through listening. By listening to how words are spoken in real conversations, I started to adjust my own pronunciation to sound more natural. At first, I was frustrated by how much I couldn't understand. It seemed like native speakers were speaking too fast, using slang and using words that I had never learned in class. But the more I listened, the more I began to pick up on patterns. I started to recognize common phrases, common sentence structures, and common ways of speaking. And even when I didn't understand every single word, I was able to infer meaning from context. Over time, I became more comfortable with hearing fast, natural speech, and I began to understand a lot more. Listening also had a huge impact on my ability to speak. The more I listened, the more I started to pick up the way people speak in real life, which in turn helped me in my own conversations. I started to mirror the phrases, tones, and expressions I heard in the conversations I listened to. For example, I would listen to how a native speaker asked questions, and then I would practice using the same structure in my own conversations. It became a way for me to connect with the language on a deeper level. One of the most valuable lessons I learned from listening is that the more you listen, the more you learn, even when you don't realize it. Every time you listen to English, you're absorbing new vocabulary, new expressions, new ways of speaking. Even if you don't understand everything right away, you're still getting exposure to the language. It's like when you're a child learning your first language. You didn't understand every word, but the more you heard, the more you started to understand. And eventually, you were able to speak it. Listening also helped me break down the barrier between book English and real English. In the classroom, We learn formal English, the language of textbooks and exercises. But in the real world, English is spoken differently. There are contractions, slang, regional accents, and informal ways of speaking that you won't necessarily find in your textbooks. This is where listening becomes invaluable. By listening to native speakers, I was able to understand and eventually use the casual, conversational English that people actually speak. One of my students, James, faced a similar challenge. He was really good at grammar and vocabulary, but found it hard to understand native speakers when they talked quickly. So I suggested that he start listening to podcasts, radio shows, and YouTube videos in English. I told him, start with content that interests you and listen to it every day, even if you don't understand everything at first. James was skeptical at first, but after a few weeks of consistent listening, he came back to me and said, I can understand so much more now. At first it was overwhelming, but now I'm starting to pick up more and more words, even when they're speaking fast. This experience reminded me that listening is a skill that develops over time. The more you expose yourself to English, the easier it becomes. The key is consistency. It's about making listening a daily habit. Whether it's watching a movie in English, listening to an audiobook, or just hearing conversations in passing, the more you listen, the better you'll get. So, here's the secret. If you want to become fluent in English, listen. Listen as much as you can. Listen to podcasts, watch TV shows, listen to music, read along with audiobooks, and immerse yourself in the language. Don't be afraid if you don't understand everything at first. The important thing is that you're hearing the language, absorbing it, and getting used to how it sounds. Over time, you'll begin to understand more, speak more confidently, and sound more natural. Fluency doesn't happen overnight. But listening every day, consistently and attentively, will bring you closer to your goal faster than any other skill. So start listening, start absorbing, and watch how your language skills grow. Chapter 8: Overcoming Shyness and Mistakes. As I continued my journey to fluency, I came to realize that shyness and the fear of making mistakes were two of the biggest barriers standing in the way of my progress. I wasn't alone in this. Many of my students, and even people I met along the way, struggled with the same issue. We all want to speak a new language with confidence, but for some reason, there's often this invisible wall of fear that keeps us from moving forward. For me, the root of the problem was simple. I was afraid. Afraid of being judged, afraid of sounding silly, afraid that if I made a mistake, people would laugh at me. I wanted to speak perfectly from the very beginning, and that desire for perfection was holding me back more than anything else. I thought that if I made a mistake, it would somehow make me less competent, less capable. But the truth is, shyness and fear of mistakes are completely natural when you're learning a new language. The important thing is how you respond to them. I'll never forget the first time I spoke English in front of a group. I had been practicing for weeks, studying grammar, listening to podcasts, and memorizing vocabulary. But when the time came to actually speak, I froze. My heart raced, my palms became sweaty, and I could feel the anxiety building up. I had memorized the sentences, but as soon as I opened my mouth, my mind went blank. I was so worried about making mistakes that I couldn't even focus on what I wanted to say. And then, as if on cue, a voice in my head said, "You're going to mess up. They're going to laugh at you." But I didn't let that voice control me. Instead, I took a deep breath and reminded myself that it was okay to make mistakes. The important thing was not perfection, but communication. I wasn't there to speak perfectly. I was there to practice, to try, and to learn. I pushed through the fear, and despite a few mistakes here and there, I was able to get my message across. Afterward, I realized something important. Mistakes are not the enemy. They are the stepping stones to success. Every time I made a mistake, I learned something new. Every misstep was an opportunity to grow. I began to see mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities for improvement. It was this mindset shift that allowed me to finally overcome my shyness and embrace the process of learning. But this wasn't an easy journey. For months, I avoided speaking in front of others because I was terrified of making a mistake. I would practice by myself, but the thought of speaking English with a real person made me anxious. I remember one conversation with a friend who spoke English fluently. She asked me a simple question, and I froze. I knew the answer, but I was so afraid of saying something wrong that I couldn't speak at all. The fear of making a mistake was paralyzing. I realized then that the only way to overcome my shyness was to practice speaking, even if it wasn't perfect. That's when I started to take small steps. I forced myself to speak every day, even if it was just for a few minutes. At first, I would speak to myself in English, narrating my day, describing things I saw around me, and even having imaginary conversations. I started to become more comfortable with the sound of my own voice speaking English. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I was gaining confidence bit by bit. Next, I challenged myself to speak with other people, even if I was afraid. I would ask simple questions in English when I went out to eat or to the store. I practiced with friends who were patient with me and didn't mind my mistakes. The more I spoke, the more comfortable I became. And each time I made a mistake, I didn't see it as a failure. I saw it as a lesson. One of the biggest turning points for me was realizing that no one expects you to be perfect. I used to think that speaking a language meant you had to do it flawlessly, but I learned that fluency doesn't come from perfection. It comes from trying. It comes from practicing, even when you're unsure, and accepting that mistakes are part of the process. People don't judge you for making mistakes. They admire you for trying, for speaking up, and for putting yourself out there. I saw this shift happen with one of my students, Mia. Mia had been studying English for a long time, and she knew the grammar and vocabulary. But when it came time to speak, she would freeze. She was terrified of making mistakes. She said, "What if I say something wrong? What if they don't understand me?" I understood exactly how she felt, so I told her, "Don't be afraid of mistakes. They're not there to hurt you. They're there to teach you." I encouraged Mia to start small. We began having short, casual conversations. At first, she was nervous, but with each conversation, she grew more confident. I told her, "Don't worry if it's not perfect. Just speak. The more you speak, the more you'll improve." Slowly, she started speaking more naturally. She made mistakes, but instead of letting those mistakes discourage her, she embraced them. She laughed them off, learned from them, and continued speaking. Eventually, Mia became one of the most confident speakers in the class. Through Mia's story, I realized something important. Shyness and the fear of mistakes are normal, but they don't have to stop you. In fact, they can be the very things that propel you forward if you choose to face them head-on. Overcoming shyness and the fear of mistakes is a process that takes time, but it's essential to becoming fluent in any language. Here are a few things that helped me, and I hope they will help you too. Start small. Begin with short, simple sentences. You don't need to speak in long paragraphs or have complicated conversations right away. Start with something manageable and build your confidence from there. Celebrate progress. Every time you speak, even if you make a mistake, celebrate it. You are practicing and getting better. It's not about how perfect you are. It's about the effort you put in. Change your mindset. See mistakes as lessons. Instead of saying, "I failed," say, "I learned something new." The more you do this, the less fear you will have. Speak as much as possible. Don't wait for the perfect moment to speak. Speak as much as you can, even if it's not perfect. Practice with friends, family, or even strangers. Every time you speak, you're one step closer to fluency. Be kind to yourself. It's normal to feel shy and afraid of making mistakes. Be patient with yourself. Don't expect perfection. Just focus on progress. Remember, you will never reach fluency if you let fear control you. Mistakes are part of the process. So embrace them, speak confidently, and keep practicing. The more you speak, the more confident you will become and the less fear you will feel. You've got this. Chapter 9. Embracing Patience and Persistence. One of the most important lessons I learned on my journey to fluency in English was that patience and persistence are essential. In fact, they are the two qualities that I believe are the foundation for mastering any skill, but especially a language. For a long time, I thought that fluency could be achieved quickly, that I could just memorize enough vocabulary, practice enough sentences, and boom, I'd be fluent. But I soon realized that fluency doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and most importantly, persistence. It's a slow and steady process, and that's okay. When I first started learning English, I was eager to speak fluently as quickly as possible. I wanted to be able to carry on conversations, watch movies without subtitles, and understand everything I read. But the reality was very different. It felt like I was moving forward so slowly, and there were days when I felt like I hadn't made any progress at all. The words didn't come as quickly as I wanted them to, and I would often forget vocabulary I had just learned. I remember feeling frustrated and thinking, why isn't this working faster? Why can't I just be fluent already? It was during one of these frustrating moments that I realized something very important. Language learning isn't a race. Fluency doesn't happen in a matter of weeks or months. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And the key to success is embracing patience. You have to trust the process and understand that every small step you take is a step toward fluency. I remember a moment early in my learning when I felt like giving up. I had been studying English for several months, practicing speaking, reading, and listening, but I still didn't feel confident. I kept thinking, why isn't it happening faster? Why aren't I fluent yet? But one day, a teacher said something to me that stuck with me. Fluency is built one day at a time. Keep practicing and trust the process. That simple piece of advice changed my entire mindset. I realized that I wasn't supposed to rush through the process. I was supposed to enjoy it, take my time, and celebrate the progress I made, no matter how small. It was at that moment that I started to understand the power of patience. Learning a language takes time, and it's normal to feel like progress is slow. But every time you study, every time you practice speaking, every time you listen to English, you are getting better. Even on the days when it feels like you're not improving, you are. The progress is there. It's just not always visible right away. Alongside patience, persistence is just as crucial. This means showing up every day, even when you feel frustrated or discouraged. It means committing to the process, even when the results don't come immediately. Persistence is about pushing through the difficult days and continuing to practice, even when you don't feel like it. It's about doing the work day after day, trusting that each small effort is building towards something bigger. There were many times when I wanted to quit, when I felt like I was just going around in circles, not making real progress. But it was during these times that persistence became my greatest ally. I learned to stay consistent, to practice every day, and to keep moving forward, no matter how small the steps were. Even if I only learned a few new words or practiced for just 10 minutes a day, I was making progress. One thing that helped me during these times was setting small, achievable goals. Instead of focusing on the idea of being fluent one day, I focused on the small steps. My goal might be to learn 5 new words a day, to watch a short video in English, or to speak for 5 minutes in English every day. These small goals allowed me to see progress, which kept me motivated to continue. Every time I hit one of these small goals, I felt a sense of accomplishment, and that sense of accomplishment gave me the energy to keep going. One of my students, Thomas, was struggling with the same frustration. He had been learning English for several months, but he still didn't feel like he was making enough progress. Every time he made a mistake or forgot a word, he felt discouraged. He often said, "I'm not improving fast enough. It feels like I'm stuck." I could see his frustration, but I also saw something else. He was still showing up every day. He kept studying, kept practicing, even when it felt difficult. So, I told him something I wish someone had told me. Fluency comes with persistence. Keep going, even when it feels hard. The results will come, but you have to be patient and keep going. Thomas took this advice to heart. Instead of trying to rush through his learning, he focused on showing up every day and being consistent. He started setting small goals, like listening to a podcast in English for 15 minutes a day, or writing a journal entry in English every evening. Slowly but surely, his confidence grew. He realized that the process wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. What I saw in Thomas's journey is something that I've seen in many students. Persistence pays off. It's not about getting it perfect right away. It's about showing up every day, even when it feels difficult, and trusting that every step forward is progress. When I reflect on my own journey, I can clearly see how much my patience and persistence shaped my fluency. Looking back, I realized that all the small moments, those days when I was frustrated, when I felt like I wasn't improving, were actually part of my progress. I just didn't realize it at the time. Patience and persistence are what will carry you through the tough times. There will be days when it feels like you're not getting anywhere, when you make mistakes, or when you feel like you've hit a plateau. But the key is to keep going, keep practicing, keep speaking, keep listening, and keep learning. Don't give up. Fluency is a journey, not a destination, and every step you take is one step closer to your goal. Here's a piece of advice I want to leave you with. Focus on progress, not perfection. Don't worry about how fast you're going. Celebrate the small wins and trust that persistence will get you there. Fluency doesn't come from rushing. It comes from patience, consistency, and persistence. Keep going, and you'll get there, one step at a time. Chapter 10. The final step, celebrating success. As I reflect on my journey to fluency, I realize that one of the most important steps, perhaps the most overlooked, was celebrating success. Too often, we focus so much on what we haven't achieved, yet that we forget to acknowledge the progress we've made. Fluency doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and persistence. But more than anything, it takes the ability to recognize and celebrate the milestones along the way. It's those moments of success, no matter how small, that truly keep us motivated and moving forward. When I first started learning English, I was so focused on getting better that I almost forgot to celebrate the small victories. Every time I made progress, whether it was mastering a new word or having a conversation without hesitation, I would brush it off. I thought, it's not enough. I need to do more. But over time, I realized that this mindset was holding me back. Celebrating success isn't about being complacent. It's about recognizing the hard work you've put in and using that recognition to propel you forward. I'll never forget the first time I had a full conversation in English. It was simple. Talking about the weather with a friend. but to me, it felt like a huge accomplishment. I had spent so many months struggling with basic sentences, feeling unsure of myself. But in that moment, I realized something important. I had made progress. I had taken all those lessons, all those hours of practice, and applied them in a real conversation. I didn't know every word, and I didn't speak perfectly, but I communicated, and that's what mattered. At first, I didn't celebrate that success. I thought, okay, it's just a small conversation. I need to do more. But over time, I started to understand that every milestone, no matter how small, deserved to be celebrated. It's easy to get caught up in the bigger picture, to always think about the next goal, but that's a surefire way to burn out. If you don't celebrate your successes, you risk losing the motivation to keep going. So, I started to change my approach. I began celebrating every little victory, every word I learned, every conversation I had, every piece of feedback I received. It didn't matter how small the success was. What mattered was acknowledging it. I started to look at my progress, not just as a series of tasks to check off, but as a collection of moments that I could be proud of. This shift in mindset made a huge difference in my confidence. The more I celebrated my successes, the more I believed in myself. I stopped comparing my progress to others. Instead, I focused on my own journey, and I recognized how far I had come. This celebration of success became my fuel. It kept me motivated and reminded me of all the hard work I had put in. I also realized that celebrating success isn't just about the big moments. It's about finding joy in the process. The road to fluency can be long and challenging, and there will be times when you feel discouraged. But the key is to celebrate the small wins that happen along the way. Maybe you learned a new word, or you successfully used a phrase in conversation. Maybe you understood something in a movie that you couldn't understand a few weeks ago. These small moments are victories, and they deserve to be celebrated. One of the most powerful ways I learned to celebrate my success was by reflecting on my progress. Every few weeks, I would take a step back and look at how far I had come. I would think about where I started, the struggles I had faced, and the progress I had made. This practice of reflection not only boosted my confidence, but it also gave me the clarity to see how much I had actually achieved. In my classes, I would encourage my students to do the same. One of my students, Sarah, came to me one day feeling frustrated. She had been working hard on her English, but felt like she wasn't making enough progress. She said, "I can't understand why I'm still not fluent. I've been studying so much, but it's like I'm not getting anywhere. I asked her to stop for a moment and reflect. Think back to when you first started, I said. How much more confident are you now? How many more words do you know? How much more easily can you understand and speak? As Sarah reflected on her progress, she began to see how far she had come. She had gone from feeling nervous and unsure about speaking to confidently carrying on conversations with others. She had improved her listening skills, and she could now understand much more in movies and podcasts. Suddenly she realized that the success was already there. She just hadn't been paying attention to it. The small victories, the progress, were all around her. That's when Sarah had her aha moment. She smiled and said, "You're right. I have made a lot of progress. I just needed to step back and see it. Thank you for helping me recognize that." This moment with Sarah reminded me that celebrating success is an ongoing practice. It's not just about looking back at where you started. It's about acknowledging the hard work you've done and using it as motivation to keep going. When you take the time to celebrate your wins, no matter how small, you give yourself the energy to tackle the next challenge. Another important aspect of celebrating success is sharing your achievements with others. This can be a powerful way to build a supportive community and motivate others to keep going. I remember when I reached a milestone in my language learning, I shared it with my friends and family. I told them about the conversations I had successfully carried out in English, and the movies I could now watch without subtitles. And their encouragement and praise boosted my confidence even more. It wasn't just about feeling proud of myself. It was about sharing my success with those who supported me along the way. And it wasn't just about me. As I shared my progress, I encouraged others to share theirs. We celebrated each other's successes, and in doing so, we created a positive cycle of growth, encouragement, and motivation. So, here's the final piece of advice I want to give you. Celebrate every success. Don't wait until you're fluent to acknowledge your progress. Celebrate the small victories, the learning moments, the times when you took a risk and spoke English, even when it wasn't perfect. Every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to your goal of fluency. In the end, fluency isn't just about speaking perfectly. It's about enjoying the journey, recognizing the progress you've made, and celebrating the successes that come along the way. You've worked hard, you've made progress, and now it's time to celebrate. Great work today! Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning, journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.